The moment I booked today's guest on Marketing People Love, I knew it would be an incredible conversation about brainstorming, because Ashley is behind the handle Stuff About Advertising, and she puts more content on the internet that is insightful and breaks down what's working in advertising more than almost anyone I know. And so I wanted to bring her on, and we talked about coming up with ideas. What's the process like of brainstorming, of considering what is a insight versus an observation, and how much that can change how you think about your advertising. Talk about inspiration and where we find it, where and how to use it, and how to create new ideas out of old, or how to ignore the old so we don't get stuck in it to create new. And finally, we talk about the self-editing process. It's one of the most valuable pieces that we have. Ashley brings her background as a creative director. Also, she's now freelancing as a creative director, and her incredible background in being able to break down the process to share with us how brainstorming can be done right. So Ashley, let's dive into this conversation on brainstorming and how we come up with great creative ideas. Ashley, welcome not only to the show, but thank you for joining us, because you are someone who provides inspiration and brainstorming to me in my world. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat about ideas and brainstorming and all that.
So one of the things that I think everyone sees end work, and sometimes it's crazy. Sometimes if it's good, right, it might be a little crazy. Everyone asks themselves, how the heck did someone come up with that? How did they get there? Where in the world, did that idea come from? And it's something that you talk about and unpack in a lot of your own content that you put out there. And I know that you're such an avid learner and listener of what's happening in the space. You're always consuming, you're always analyzing. Take me back to earlier in your career and how you have maybe changed how you view the concept of brainstorming or coming up with ideas. That's a very broad question, but how has it transformed from younger in your career to where you are now?
I think early on in my career, I approached every brainstorming session with panic, because I didn't really understand that there was a creative process. I would look at a blank page and just freak out, thinking, how the heck am I going to put ideas on this page? I don't even know where to start. And I would just kind of fumble around until I found something. And now the process is still pretty chaotic. Being creative is just a lot of mess until you find something great. But I do feel like I've found somewhat of a process. Like, I will start by just kind of brain dumping everything and making space for ideas. So I just kind of word vomit and get every little nugget out of my brain and just figure out, what are these initial little thoughts? What am I interested in? What do I want to research? What interests me about this brand or this product enough to go deeper on it? And that's kind of where I start. And that has been basically the beginning of a process. Whereas before I would just freak out and think, I don't know where to start. Now I start with just word vomit, which is not a fun phrase to use, but it makes sense.
That's so interesting. So my process is a little bit different now, and I'm curious how this resonates. But one of the things that I sort of just start with in general is this concept of, like, I ask myself, you call self-expressive benefits is the fancy word, but like, what is someone's why? Like, why would someone, not only why would someone buy this, not functionally, but like, what are they saying about themselves? Who do they believe themselves to be? And that's typically where I start I write down all those ideas. I'm just like, okay, what am I saying? Like, I'm wearing a hedgehog shirt right now. And so I'm like, well, who would buy a shirt with a hedgehog? Well, someone who wants to be adorable, right? Like, clearly. But like, it's like everything we do, everything, like, I'm looking at your background, it's like, it's a self-expression of who we are. And so that is where I start now, as I just write down all those ideas. And oddly, because I feel like any good idea that comes out strategically will map back to, reflecting back to someone, like, by buying this product or service is who you are. But then I think the next step, which I think we both have become fans of another person who posts a lot of content, a guy named Jason Bagley, because Bagley is his last name. But, he talks a lot. I love this clip. He talks a lot about the idea of just throwing, like to your point, you call it word vomit, but like throwing ideas and not judging yourself. And I think that's the thing that if I were to say between now and maybe 15 years ago, like what I've learned is just that process of not judging myself, that is part of the process, that it just like bad ideas are part of the process, good ideas are part of the process. I guess my follow-up question for you is with the word you were talking about, word vomit, putting out ideas. At what point are you seeking outside inspiration? Like, are you doing that? I mean, you're always doing it. That's probably not the best word, but like when it's more specific to something you're working on, do you do that before you look at the blank page? Do you do it after you like look at the blank, like when or during? I mean, I'd love to hear that because I think everyone does it differently.
I like to start without any outside input. Because when you first start with a new brand or a new product, you know pretty close to nothing about it, usually. You might have some preconceived notions or something, but those are all really important to kind of sit with for a minute because you, in that moment, are just like the customer. Once you start digging into it, you become the client because you know too much. So I really like to start with just my own knowledge of it and just what's in my brain currently. And then once I've brain dumped all of that, then I go deeper. Then I immerse myself in forums and reviews and videos and everything I can to learn more about it. But I like to leave that for later on in the process because you really should relish in that moment of ignorance in the beginning because you're going to find the obstacles and the preconceived notions, the concerns, the things that your audience is going to be feeling. So I like to just let myself stew in that for a little bit.
That's so fascinating because, it reminds me a little bit. I think the word that people would use would be more of like gut instinct. Sometimes it's like, okay, what's your gut instinct to this? Because it isn't yet. Not only is it not fully informed yet, and that could be good or bad, right? But it's also not, to your point, it's not like, I want to say blemished by knowing too much. I think that's kind of what you're going for.
Yeah.
It is funny because we're working on some massive projects right now. And on one of them, it's like, there's been so much strategy and so much thought. And, one of my ACDs was like, that idea that we wrote on the plane on the way home from the client meeting? Like, I still kind of feel like that's the best one. And I'm like, yeah, because it was before we started overthinking it. It's before we started thinking about all the things, and you can get in your own head quite a bit. And so I could see, it's interesting because I'm trying to think, like one of the most powerful questions I've asked myself when kicking off like maybe a new client is, if I knew about this before, why did I not buy it, or why did I buy it? And sometimes both are valuable.
Exactly.
Right? Why have I ignored this ad for this whatever company 100 times for today? What about that did not break through to me? It can help you find new answers. And so I think that's a really interesting, I'm just like, my mind is racing with the number of times that, we had a client who was frustrated that we didn't get the product that they sent to us in time. And I said, well, no, it didn't come in time. And that's really frustrating. But because it didn't come in time, I had to go to the store. I had to go to multiple stores to find the product. And I had the shopping experience. If it had just been sent to me, I wouldn't have gotten the experience of like actually being a shopper looking for your product. Where does it sit on the shelves? How's it in comparison? How's it look compared to the other bottles or the other things, the other canisters, right? And I realized the blessing in disguise of just like sometimes being a customer is the best way to understand how to reach customers. And that's such a great point. So we haven't gotten to the point where you seek out inspiration yet. So at what point do you seek out inspiration? At what point are you like, okay, maybe I'm going to bring in outside inspiration? Or I feel like I keep asking the same question, like, where does inspiration belong in your process?
I think it's always kind of under the surface because I believe that the best inspiration comes from outside of the advertising world. And it comes from your life experience. And so I try to approach everything with I'm building up my bank of inspiration by just experiencing life. I'm reading books, I'm watching movies, I'm going to museums, traveling, reading, whatever it is. All of that is going to inform future ideas, even if it's subconsciously. It's just something that I once saw one time, and whoa, that actually is a great way to visualize this idea that I just came up with, or something like that. So it's always just kind of there. And that's why I think building up that life experience bank is so important, because it's just going to be underlying every creative idea you come up with in the future. But when I'm seeking very specific inspiration, like if I have an idea and I need a really cool visual way of expressing it, I'm going to go look on Pinterest, on Reddit. I'm going to look at fashion magazines, fine art, things, again, outside of advertising. Because I think if we keep looking inward, we're just going to be doing the same stuff all the time. We're going to be creating things for advertisers, and that's a quick way to get pretty boring.
That's so interesting. Okay, so help me with this too, because you break down and share more advertising than anyone I know. So yeah. So I'm like, I just think that, I mean, I agree with you, by the way. I will say the only caveat I'd have to that is I love watching more classic ads, like just over the last, we'll call it 30 years or so. And when I say classic, I mean ones that really move the needle, because I believe that there are fundamentals hidden in there that apply to, like, to me, for instance, the 30-minute infomercial is, like, when I realized that we're making the 30-minute infomercial for the internet era, that when we started getting into long-form content, what's a 3-minute commercial? My dad once said to me, "Oh, I can't believe people watch a 3-minute commercial on the internet from you guys." And I'm like, "You're watching 30-minute infomercials on TV. Like, what do you mean a 3-minute commercial?" But when I realized it, she follows a similar fundamental cadence and flow, that I started finding, like, Ogilvy books from 40 years ago, before the internet was even a thought, and they're talking about long form written content and how it outperforms shorter copy and all these things. And I'm like, there's hidden in all of that of the work that works, I should say, hidden in the work that works, not just work, but work that actually move the needle, is fundamentals that can inspire that next idea. As ridiculous as the first Axe commercials were, where the guy's spraying his chest and women are like flocking, I'm like, well, something about that worked. Like, they became a probably billion-dollar company, and like, why did that work? And I think the why behind why it works is, like, that's what I find interesting and inspirational. Yeah. Maybe I need to get more into fine art, though. I mean, if you're if you're finding inspiration, I mean, not that I'm not into fine art, but that you're finding inspiration elsewhere. When you're in the process of got these ideas, you're bringing it all together, what is your self-editing process? I mean, it's something that I talk to our team a lot about. It's something that I think it's the hardest thing to teach. I don't know how to teach. I'm just being blunt. I'm trying to figure out, like, how to even teach that, because I think the self-editing process of, like, oh, this is a good idea because this is not a good idea. I can't even share some of the ideas that I've heard over the last year, where I'm just like, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I'm like, whoa, that should have never gotten off that page. How do you think about self-editing? What is that process like for you?
I think, I mean, you mentioned that I am constantly analyzing ad campaigns, and I think the training myself filter is where that helps, because I'm looking at ad campaigns and seeing why I liked it, why I didn't like it, what I think I would change, and all of that's going to help me refine my editing in the future. I might be inspired by things outside of advertising, but the fundamentals of advertising are what help me edit my ideas throughout the process. I have always, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, but I have a very, very strong self-editing filter. In the beginning stages of concepting, that kind of screws me, because it's hard to let myself write down the bad ideas. And that's part of the process is, again, like I said, you have to empty your brain of all the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. And since I have such a strong filter, it's very painful for me to write those things down. But once I'm past that first stage, I like to just go through and pick out anything that I personally have a reaction to. If I think it's funny, if it makes me smile, if it makes me think, then it's most likely going to do the same thing for my customer, my audience. I pick those out first. Those are my strongest ideas that I'm going to keep working on. But then I like to go back again, and anything that's left, if there's something that is based on a really interesting insight or fact or observation or something that maybe my idea just wasn't quite right, but what it's based on is still strong, then I like to pull that out too and keep working on that. Anything else is just, it's cut.
Yeah. Yeah. I always find it's like, I think one of the trickiest parts of that process is when I'm trying to figure out if ideas should be merged. Like, because sometimes when you take two ideas and you put them together, they make like an idea even better. But sometimes you put them together and it just muddles the idea. And I feel like that, like as we're going through, and I feel it for the team too, like when we're maybe later in the stages of like when you have things that you like and it's like, but there's just not a place for it and you have to say goodbye to that idea or bye to whatever that is. That is like, honestly, I think one of the hardest parts. It's just like when you got something that it's either really fun or really sticky or really creative, but you're just like, it's not the core insight. It's not the end idea. I think everyone talks about like North Star or core insights, right? And I think what's interesting is in my career so far, it's like some clients or partners or however, some of them have a really clear understanding of like, this is my core consumer insight. But I would say 80% of people out there, and they could be doing hundreds of millions of business, still don't know what their core insight is, right? Or maybe they got the job there and they've been there 6 months and they're like, yeah, we sell a lot of this stuff, right? How do you self-generate core insights and maybe define whether I need to or you need to for the listeners, like what a core insight is, because that is ultimately like how you're making these decisions to whittle away what doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think there isn't, at least from what I've seen, there isn't an agreed upon definition of an insight in the industry. Everyone has a different interpretation of it. But I think it usually boils down to some type of relatable truth. And it's something that is either a behavioral truth, an emotional truth, a psychological truth. It's just something that humans can hear or look at and say, oh my gosh, that's so true. Or they'll say, wow, I didn't think about it that way, or something like that. It's just some type of relatable point of society and humanity that can relate to your audience. And that's what helps you skip all the gimmicky, salesy messaging. When you have an insight like that, that's what you can focus your creative on. The hard part about insights is something can be an actual insight, but not necessarily be a good insight. Like, yes, it's a truth. It's something like, sure, yeah, that happens in society.
Yes.
But is it interesting enough to build an idea off of? Not usually. I just think there's a lot of bad insights out there, and it takes work and effort to get to something that's interesting. When I have been teaching people about insights, that's a struggle a lot of times, is people will stop at something that is so obvious and it's just kind of an observation about humans, and I keep trying to push them and think that what you have right now is an observation, not an insight. And to get to that next step, you have to say, why is this thing that you've observed happening? What are the emotions behind it?
Yep.
That's going to get you to that more relatable core insight that you can then build really strong, strategic, relatable creative off of.
Man, I don't know if you just made that up off the top of your noggin, the like push beyond an observation to an insight. But I could not. I mean, that just resonated with me a ton, especially when I'm thinking about just the work any work that we've done or been responsible for, we've really broken through. I mean, I always say this with, we started working with a men's soap company called Dr. Squatch. This was about 7-8 years ago. They were doing $3 million a year in sales. They were 6 years into their business, and they've hockey sticked to hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. And one of the things that I would say is like, we started selling more soap when we realized we're not selling soap. And it was like, okay, because we kept talking about Dr. Squatch kept talking about the soap. And then we're like, no, what we're selling is an experience that you get every day in your shower. And that experience is worth the extra money, but only if we're able to articulate it. And what's crazy is when advertising actually adds to the experience. And I think that that's what we're seeing in a lot of what we do. I see it with beer brands, of course, like when they do a dilly dilly or whatever, where it's like you smile more, you feel more joy because the advertising adds to the product. I mean, Coke and Pepsi are great examples. I mean, at the end of the day, no one's going to call them like healthy, drinks, but they've done a really nice job creating those feelings around the product, and the idea that it's refreshing, the idea that it's celebrating life in some way, all those type of things. It's just a really interesting thought that how many people are basing what they're selling off of an observation instead of an insight. That's gonna haunt me. I'm gonna bring that back to our team and be like, is it an observation or an insight? I'm gonna steal it from you. I thought that was great. Did you make that up?
I don't think so. I mean,
you can't. You're like, I don't know at this point. It's all whose ideas are whose.
Somewhere. I don't know. I've noticed every time I've been trying to teach anyone at any level about insights, that's a huge sticking point, is them just not recognizing the difference between an observation and an insight. And observations are fine. Sometimes you can find interesting things there, but more often than not, pushing further beyond that is going to get you to a more interesting place.
And if you don't want me putting you on a spot, in your career so far, like when in your career that you've had one of those moments where you felt the impact of like, oh, I found an insight for this brand and it's working. I feel it, I see it. And I'm curious if there's any examples in your life where you're like, yeah, that was when I was really maybe experiencing that for either the first time or in a powerful way.
Yeah, so I did a campaign for an addiction rehab center called Face It Together, and they really wanted something more powerful than a typical PSA about addiction. And I fortunately don't have any experience in my life with addiction. I didn't know anyone who had experienced it, so I had to really immerse myself in a lot of research about this audience and about how it feels to deal with addiction. And one of the things that I read about was this feeling of having to start over again and again and again because you kind of relapse, or you have these moments where you return to whatever substance use you're using. And in reading about that felt like I had a reaction to it. I mentioned earlier, I just know if I have a reaction to it that other people are going to also. And that was something where I thought, okay, an observation here would be people relapse a lot. The insight is the feelings behind relapsing and having to start over and how it feels frustrating and like you just can't win. And so we really dug into that part of it. And we ended up creating these really powerful videos where we had our talent just recording themselves in their cars with an iPhone. And it's kind of them vlogging their experience saying, okay, day one. And then you see them again. All right, back to day one. And you see these emotions that are tied to having to start at day one all the time. And we cried while editing these things because they were so powerful. And it's because we found the emotions behind this observation. And it was so much more powerful than anything else we could have done.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a good example. I put you on the spot and you found like a perfect one where, because you could feel in the way you described it, there's a difference. I think the difference there is the difference between telling someone something and showing emotionally that you connect with what they're feeling, right? It's probably the difference between, I'm going to butcher the two words here, but the difference between sympathy and empathy. I didn't butcher them. That's what I was looking for. I mean, literally, think about that. That is the difference between those, an observation versus an insight. It is sympathy versus empathy for what someone's going through.
That's a great way to put it.
That will produce work that just connects more. Okay, so I would be remiss to have you on without asking you about this. You have been one of the most consistent people I know on the internet talking about things that inspire you, whether it be advertising or whatever. I mean, primarily advertising, but other things as well. You've started a podcast, you started a newsletter. What has that journey been like? And when I think one of the biggest things that anyone looking in would say, watching you do what you do, is like, how do you keep coming up with new stuff? How do you always have something to talk about? How are you able to do that, right? I think it dovetails with the topic today around brainstorming and not just brainstorming, but coming up with creative ideas consistently all the time. How has that felt over the last couple of years as you've put yourself out there and built an audience and started putting yourself out there even more? What's that been like? What's the flow? How does it affect all the things we've talked about today?
It's been crazy. I always have a lot on my plate, but I thrive when I have a lot on my plate, so it works for me. But it all comes from a place of just obsession with advertising. I find it fascinating. I love studying it, talking about it, dissecting it. I just want to know everything there possibly is, and I love bringing people together over that topic. And I think everything I do comes from a place of wanting the industry to be more accessible and have it be a less toxic, more open, more inclusive place. And so I'm basically trying to make everything about advertising feel more welcoming and accessible. And I do that just by talking about it and being honest. And I think since I'm a freelancer and I'm not attached to a certain agency right now, it's a lot easier for me to do that and to be honest. And I think a lot of people appreciate that honest commentary about everything, which is why they come to me for my opinions and my perspectives on things. So I think everything comes from that place of honesty. So every little project I add or every video I make always comes from that.
What's crazy too is, when I graduated from college, I knew nothing about advertising. I mean, I got my degree in communications. I started out in news. I had other people in my life tell me I'd be good at advertising. I was like, I don't know anything about advertising. I thought my dream was to be a game show host, which honestly I think I still would have been pretty good at.
That'd be great.
But it's not too late. It's not too late, Ashley. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that I would imagine, and this is a heavy but like positive, like pretty big thought, is I believe the content you're putting out can change someone's life because, there's so many young people on a platform like a TikTok or wherever else who can be attracted to this content and hear how you think about it and hear these things in a way that, creates an interest, plants a seed of interest in them that they might not have in their world and in their life otherwise. Like maybe they don't have anyone saying, hey, this is a career path. This is something you can do. And I know for a fact that people don't really understand that it's a career path because I felt that, right? Going back to our conversation earlier about being that customer of that feeling. It's like, I remember distinctly someone who was a mentor of mine was kind enough to be like, you would be amazing in advertising. I'm like, okay, but I don't know what that even means, what that looks like. She introduced me to a guy here who made the local pest control ads for the local news stations, like jingles and all. He had like 1 or 2 employees. And so, my first interaction was talking to this guy and be like, oh, you can make a living making commercials? Like, I guess that makes sense. Like, but like, I don't know. I've never made a commercial before. I'm 22 years old or whatever. And so what I'm saying is my world was as big as that guy's office. I was like, one day, a decade from now, I too could have 2 employees and I could make pest control ads or maybe even HVAC and heating and air ads. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but that was literally like the dream. I was like, I could do that. So then to like when people are like, oh, like, are you living your dream when you made those Super Bowl commercials? I'm like, that was not my dream. Like, that happened, but that was not the dream. Like, the dream wasn't making it to some place. It was like, I just didn't even know I could do this for a living. And so I have to plant that seed in your mind that like when you're putting that out in front of young people, you just never know who you're inspiring to get into advertising and this career path. It could change their life. And even though you do have tens of thousands of followers and all the things that you deserve, I think you deserve millions of followers personally.
Thank you.
I just can't. I can't tell you how much I imagine it has the impact to change someone's life. And that's crazy to think about when you're like, and I just like talking about advertising. And you're, my team members call you the queen of the green screen. Is that a term that you've heard?
I love that. I've had someone call me the queen of advertising, but I like that too.
Green screen's even bigger than advertising.
Yeah,
that's
true.
like a whole effect. So, you got to take it where you can get it. Well, Ashley, thank you for being on. Before people head out from this podcast, where else can they find you? Because you will be a forever source of inspiration, what you're putting out in the world. So where can they find you and connect with what you're putting out in the world?
Yeah, you can find me at Stuff About Advertising pretty much anywhere. My biggest platforms are TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And then I just started a newsletter called Thought Reader, which is just kind of parsing through all the cringy thought leadership out there to find the really thought-provoking things that are worth having discussions about. And I also have another podcast called Ad Cinema Club, where we talk about movies that are focused on advertising in some way, and we dissect them and figure out, are they accurate to the industry? And usually the plots of those movies are pretty ridiculous, so it's a lot of fun to talk about. But yeah, that's me.
I love it. All right, yeah, Stuff About Advertising. You do not want to miss out. Please make sure you go and follow Ashley. Ashley, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation.